Alrighty, we are live. So I'm gonna go ahead and get my windows together. Okay, welcome to our live group session tonight. We are going to be going over logical reasoning. We did reading comp last week, and the general plan is to keep going back and forth until I run out of stuff to do. So, tonight we are going to be going over logical reasoning, drill set 5. And yeah, I'll be going through those questions using the general approach. These sessions are to get y'all used to how to approach these questions and how to break it down so that it's easy for you instead of seeing like it's a foreign language. Before we jump into the actual run through of drill set 5 on LawHub, I just want to have a couple reminders. So the first one here is that we will be doing these every week until I think I said June, July. I have a date. Can't remember off the top of my head right now. Everything's blurry. So I'll put that in the description later. And I also have a post on here to tell you about the last date that I expect to do these. But every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern time, we'll be here and I'll be running through stuff. So this is free tutoring, coaching. If you want to be in the Zoom room and ask me questions live, you can go to Ko-fi and purchase your tickets on Ko-fi. If you're a member that already works with me, you get in these sessions for free. So, um, that's pretty much it. You want a link to the Ko-fi? That'll be in the description down below after the video is posted. And yeah, maybe I'll post it in the chat a little bit too if somebody has questions about that and I can actually get to it. But okay, we're going to go ahead and jump right in to drill set 5 for logical reasoning. Let me see, share this. Okay, and let me make my window a little smaller here. Oh, you know what? Up the top is nice. Okay. All right, let's get started. So, columnist. Voters are often disappointed in even in those elected politicians who actually keep their promises. This is because the promised actions so often fail to solve the problems they are meant to solve. Okay. For example, reducing taxes need not increase prosperity, and spending more money on schools does not guarantee educational improvements. Okay. If voters wish to be satisfied with those they elect, they must therefore. All right. We're jumping right in here. So, honestly, this doesn't appear to be too complicated in what's being said, but I think because it's late, my brain like takes a little bit more to warm up here. But what I got is that people are often disappointed in politicians because even when they keep their promises, they really don't do much. They fail to solve the problems they're meant to solve. So, if you reduce taxes, it doesn't necessarily increase prosperity, which is the assumed here to be the purpose of reducing taxes. And then spending more money on schools doesn't guarantee educational improvements. Those are examples of how you may fulfill your promise and do the thing you said you're going to do, but it doesn't always lead to the results that you said it was going to lead to. Okay. So then we have this sentence at the end here that says, okay, so if voters want to be satisfied with those they elect, they must therefore. Now, here, what we're left with is a statement that we're left to complete. What I can already tell by this question that's going to come up is it's probably going to be asking me to finish the sentence. Um, I am not looking on that other side right now. Like I intentionally just look at the stimulus and then I look at the question because I want to stay true to this process, which is you start here and you understand this as much as possible, then you go to the other side. So, if I were to finish this sentence for the columnist, voters wish to be satisfied with those they elect, they must therefore. I would probably say something along the lines of, um, like elect people that can actually come through with the intentions that they seek, or they must therefore, mm, like have a way to better vet out the results that they want, right? Because the whole problem is that the voters are disappointed because they're not getting the results they're looking for. Their problems are not actually getting solved. So in order to be satisfied and to resolve that issue, the problems need to get solved. So the rest of this needs to be something along the lines of the problem needs to be solved. Okay. This doesn't really have a gap in reasoning that I'm seeing automatically. And again, because of the dot, dot, dot here, the ellipsis, I'm expecting it's my responsibility to just finish the sentence. So this is good to go over to the question side with. So let's look at it. All right, question one. Which one of the following most logically completes the columnist argument? Okay, just like we expected, finish the sentence. And again, my guess to that is going to be an answer that has to do with they must therefore have something along the lines of getting their problem solved. They gotta find a way to get those problems solved, actually, instead of just voting for people who may or may not come through with the actual results. So let's see. A, seek candidates who attack problems not only by spending money, but by using their imaginations. Who attack problems, not solve. Not only spending money, but by using their imagination. You can use your imagination all you want, but that doesn't mean that the problem's solved. So we're not worried about attacking the problem. We're worried about solving the problem. Next, B, look beyond those programs that benefit only themselves to those that are conducive to the general welfare. Look beyond those programs that benefit only themselves. The voters need to look beyond programs that only benefit themselves. Okay. And look toward those, this is really wind funky, that are conducive to general welfare. This argument didn't have anything to do with being so selfish that you don't get the results. The problem was we're not getting the results. So being more concerned about general welfare instead of selfish, like we don't care. Next, C. And again, a reminder, because sometimes it's easy to forget as you go through these. I'm looking for a way to solve their problems, actually. Um, understand, the voters need to understand better the relation between the problems that concern them. Okay. And the solutions politicians propose to deal with those problems. Okay. This is getting to what I'm looking for. I hope y'all are catching that. If you're not catching it, here's the deal. I was saying that the voters need to find a better way to actually get their problem solved. And one of the early guesses I said that aligns with that was maybe they vote for politicians that'll actually bring about the results that they want and not just the things that are not coming through. This is an example of that. This says that the voters need to better understand the relation, basically the relationship between the problems that concern them and the solutions that politicians propose. Here's how that solves our issue. If the voters say, okay, this politician said that if they do this, it'll have this result. Let's use one of these examples, even though they said it didn't work. This politician said they're going to reduce taxes and then it'll increase prosperity. Well, if the voters better understand the relationship between reducing taxes and increasing prosperity, they'll be better informed and better allowed to vote on the politician that's actually going to bring about the results that actually solve their problems. So, for example, with this one, a politician says, I'm going to reduce taxes and that's going to increase prosperity. The voters, having a better understanding of the relationship, might say, that doesn't work, at least not in the way that you're proposing to do it, right? So, this is how we actually get those problems solved. I love this answer. Let's see, D and E. Choose candidates who truly intend to keep their promises. Okay. I already have a problem there, and I'm gonna go ahead and stop there. I was gonna wait, but I'm not gonna wait. Here's the problem with this already. Remember in the argument, they said they're disappointing even in those elected politicians who actually keep their promises. So it does not matter if they're keeping their promises or not. What matters is, are the things they're doing actually bringing about the results that we're looking for? And they're not. So this is already wrong because of that. But let's keep reading just to be sure. Not those whose promises are designed only to win elections. Yeah, just no. Because the rest of this is basically saying voters need to choose candidates who intend to keep promises, and the voters should not choose people whose promises are only made to win elections. Again, even for the ones who are keeping their promises, we still got problems. The end part of that didn't help. Okay, E. Consider which problems are most important to them and choose those candidates who express the greatest commitment to solving those problems. You can have the best commitment to solving those problems in the world, but if you don't actually have the sauce to make it work, if you don't actually have the right method to bring about those results, that's the issue here. Doesn't matter about your commitment if you don't have the right answer. And in this case, we have a good answer. It's C. Let's see it. Got it. Okay, let's keep going. Um, where's my, okay, good. I had to make sure I knew where my chat box was. McCloskey. 80% of Neanderthal stone tools ever discovered, okay, display asymmetrical chipping. Asymmetrical. Okay, the stone's chipped and it's not symmetrical. Got it. And 80% of them did. Got it. While only 30% of Homo erectus stone tools, okay, so we're comparing the Neanderthal stone tools to the Homo erectus stone tools, okay, and only 30% of those ones, the Homo erectus, discovered display asymmetrical chipping. Okay, so while the Neanderthal, overwhelming majority of them, 80% of them, I hate how they do the 80 here and the 30 here. I know it's intentional to throw you off, but whatever. So 80% of the Neanderthal stones um have the asymmetrical chipping, overwhelming majority. But the Homo erectus, small minority, have the asymmetrical chipping. But both of them have it. Okay, cool. The stone tools discovered by the Shibato expedition display asymmetrical chipping. I already know what they're gonna guess. They're gonna probably say something about, oh, so it's Neanderthal because Neanderthal had more. It's flawed reasoning, but let's keep reading. So they're more likely Neanderthal than Homo erectus. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna tell you this, it's already flawed. Um, just because the overwhelming majority of the Neanderthal stones had asymmetrical chipping and not many of the Homo erectus ones had the chipping, when you find some stones with chipping, that doesn't necessarily mean we're looking at Neanderthal versus Homo erectus. First of all, they both have the asymmetrical chipping. We need more evidence to show that it's likely the Neanderthal versus Homo erectus. This isn't enough. Um, so just because you have a high percentage and asymmetrical chipping is highly correlated with the Neanderthal stones, that doesn't mean that it's Neanderthal stone. In this case, I'm thinking correlation, not causation, is probably the flaw I'm looking for, but like it might frame it a little bit differently because correlation causation sometimes sounds a little bit different. And they'd probably be making a stronger statement here if we were talking about correlation versus causation. It'd be like, so it's definitely not more likely. But yeah, I know that the root of the issue here is in the fact that like you were assuming that it's Neanderthal just because they had a higher proportion of asymmetrical chipping versus the Homo erectus, and that's not enough. It's just not enough. Okay. Two, the reasoning in McCloskey's argument is flawed. We're looking for the flaw in that the argument fails to consider. So yeah, this might be correlation versus causation, but if it sounds closer to anything of like you can't just assume that it's Neanderthal because it had a higher amount, that's what I'm looking for. Okay. So the argument fails to consider that. Okay. Stone tools may become asymmetrically chipped through repeated usage. Nope. That's I'm not even gonna take my imagination on the trail of trying to understand what's going on with that because it's so far from what I'm looking for. I'm gonna treat this question a little like time conditions so that y'all can see how fast that might go. I wish I would have made this decision a little bit earlier, but it's fine. I'm gonna run through this like I would under time conditions, and then I'll go back and explain some things. So let's do this. Okay, B. Fails to consider that many stone tools displaying asymmetrical chipping may either be Neanderthal or Homo erectus. No. Um, that a greater percentage of Homo erectus tools may have originally displayed asymmetrical chipping, but that this identifying feature may have worn away over time. Maybe, but that's not what I'm looking for. But maybe that there may be more extant Homo erectus tools than Neanderthal tools. Extant? I don't know what that means. So this is interesting. Let's keep looking for what I'm looking for. The number of tools recovered by the Shibato expedition, and thus discounts. Okay, fails to consider the number of tools, and thus discounts the possibility that the sample is not representative. Oh, okay. So we don't have anything that's exactly like what I'm looking for. So now what I'm gonna do is go back here. This is already like maybe more extant Homo erectus. This doesn't even sound like it's indicating anything that's helpful. This is the one that I paused on because this is the one that I liked, and I would choose this one. Now, let me go back and explain some things. Let's clear this up. So what happened here? I was looking for something that said you can't just assume that it's the Neanderthal just because they had a higher proportion. The correlation's not causation. They didn't have a super strong statement here though, so I guess it probably wasn't going to be said like that. Probably wasn't going to be said as correlation versus causation. But they're assuming too much just because the Neanderthal had a higher percentage of these types of stones versus the Homo erectus. Doing too much. So let's talk more closely about what happened here. When I didn't find what I was looking for, as I was going through, I was still open to things that sounded like they could be right, even if it wasn't necessarily what I was thinking. A was just no. And A was just a no because um, stone tools may become asymmetrically chipped through repeated usage. What does that have to do with the fact that they're guessing that it's Neanderthal versus Homo erectus? Like, we don't care why they're asymmetrically chipped. We just found asymmetrically chipped stones. The purpose doesn't really matter. So that's off the table. B, many stone tools displaying asymmetrical chipping may be neither Neanderthal nor Homo erectus. Okay, here's the deal. Maybe. This could be the case that the stone tool, okay, I'm gonna take out the mini here because I'm already having a problem with that too. But it could be the case that the stone tools with asymmetrical chipping might be neither Neanderthal nor Homo erectus. But here we're concerned with which is more likely between these two groups, not like as a whole. When we find these chip stones, this is going to be the case. So this is taking us off topic from the argument at hand because we're looking for the reason that this argument is flawed. This argument is only rooted in comparing Neanderthal to Homo erectus, and then they say that this is more likely to be Neanderthal than Homo erectus. We're not, the problem wasn't in that they missed, hey, it might be neither one. Mm-mm. There's a different flaw that's more apparent, and it's in the fact that they took this higher percentage to be the mean that when we found this other asymmetrical chipping thing, it was likely to be this group of Neanderthals. That's what this argument is concerned with, and that's why this argument has a flaw. This is going outside the bounds. Okay. C. Let me come back to that one. D. That there may be more extant Homo erectus tools than Neanderthal tools. All right. So here's where, if extant really means something really important, I could get this wrong. But I didn't have a problem knocking this out, and it was because of C, which I'll get into a little bit later. But here's the deal with D. Extant. What I do know about the prefix X is it means out. Tent sounds like existent to me. So existing outside of something is kind of what I understand this to be. Like that'd be my best guess. And reading this in that capacity, that there may be more something that exists outside of something, Homo erectus tools than Neanderthal tools. Yeah, I don't know. That doesn't really help me understand why you assume Neanderthal with more of the chipping than the Homo erectus. If anything, and this meant some kind of existence outside of something, maybe it meant that these stones were more out and about than the Neanderthal ones, then it would mean that the Homo erectus would be the more likely to be chipped asymmetrically, right? Because like they're out and about, and Neanderthal maybe are not. It's just, I feel like that's one of those things to throw you off. They don't even give enough context to really go anywhere with that. It's giving not helpful. And especially when I'm looking for something that's rooted in the fact that we took that higher percentage to mean that it's likely to be Neanderthal. Mm-mm. E, the number of tools recovered by the Shibato expedition and thus discounts. Oh, it fails to consider the number of tools recovered. Okay, so here's my issue with that already. Again, we're not worried about the amount of tools that they recovered because it's just for any which ones they pull up, they had this asymmetrical chipping, and you assume that to be Neanderthal because they had a higher percentage. We don't really care about the number and that making a difference. But okay, thus discounts the possibility that the sample's not representative. Um, They're not worried about the general sampling here. They're worried about the exact stone tools that they discovered. They said the stone tools discovered by the Shibato expedition display asymmetrical chipping. So they is the stone tools discovered. So we don't care about general sample. We say that the ones we found had the asymmetrical chipping. So those specific ones, we don't care about a representative sample. So even by process of elimination, I come down to C. But here's why I like C. C says that a greater percentage of Homo erectus tools may have originally displayed asymmetrical chipping, but that this identifying feature may have worn away over time. Okay, here's the deal. What C does is it complicates this 30% of Homo erectus stone tools. So they found 80% of Neanderthal stone tools with the asymmetrical chipping, and this one says, well, actually, a greater proportion of the Homo erectus stone tools might have actually been asymmetrically chipped too, but over time it wore down. Maybe Homo erectus is like older than Neanderthal, so I don't like that makes more sense, right? Over time, those effects, maybe it started off like this, but over time, as it wore down, it evened out, so it wasn't asymmetrical anymore. And so, what does that do? Well, that makes it more complicated then, where we don't feel as good about guessing that it's Neanderthal because the thing that you had in your favor is now working against you when maybe this is 80%, maybe this is higher than 80%. Um, they said greater percentage of the tools. I don't know if they mean greater just for the Homo erectus tools or greater than the 80% of Neanderthal. I think to be safe, you would take this as meaning a greater percentage of Homo erectus themselves and not in comparison to Neanderthal. Um, but yeah, this one makes the most sense because it gives us a further issue as to why you shouldn't just take it to mean that these tools were from the Neanderthal. That high percentage of chipped tools doesn't give us enough here. Oh, 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 oh. Let's see here. So this might be one I get because let's see what extant means. I'm gonna look this up. Let's see. Extant. Let's see. Oh, it literally just has to do with existing, period. Okay, so let's go back. There may be more existent Homo erectus tools than Neanderthal tools. Oh, okay. Wow, okay. This is rare. Usually, if they have an answer here with a complicated word and there's no workaround there, usually you could still get it right without knowing that word. This one, it threw me because I didn't know what the word meant and I had to move forward. But let me explain why this one would be the answer then. So, if there are more Homo erectus tools that exist than Neanderthal tools, then you have even more of a reason to believe that the stone tools you found would be Homo erectus rather than Neanderthal. Period. Um, yeah, that's just it. Like when you find some of these stone tools, if there's more of them in one group than the other, you might think, why wouldn't you assume it's the one that has more tools, period, not the one that just has the asymmetrical chipping? Why this one will be wrong then? Mm, hmm. Greater percentage of Homo erectus tools may have originally displayed it. I'm having a tough time because I actually like this one. But let me think outside my box. Okay, if it were the case that a greater percentage of the Homo erectus had chipping, but it worn away over time, what would be the problem here, if there's a problem? Stone tools discovered by the... Hmm. The only thing I can think of right now in the top of my head is the fact that, okay, if a greater percentage of Homo erectus tools had the asymmetrical chipping at first, but it wore away over time. That doesn't necessarily give us a hint towards when we find ones with asymmetrical chipping that it's Homo erectus. Okay, I got it. So here's why this one would be wrong. It's because for the ones we find, they're asymmetrical. That's it. That's it. So if the Homo erectus ones maybe started off one way and then wore off, what would make me believe that the ones we're finding now are all of a sudden Homo erectus? Why aren't those ones worn off too? That's what will give you pause there. So yeah, even if they did start off with asymmetrical chipping, by the time we find them, 30% of them only still have the asymmetrical, and 80% of the Neanderthals do. So these maintain better generally. So when we find the other ones in present day that maintain it, that doesn't really take away from that, I guess. I said I guess because I'm being shady and I'm mad, but it's okay. Another thing I can think about too is why wouldn't you guess the same thing for, well, yeah, I'm not even gonna go that far. No, that's good enough. Mm. Okay, well, we're gonna keep moving. Oh, somebody dropped out the room here. I'll keep an eye out for when it pop back up. Okay. 3, people in high risk occupations tend to, oh, this is different. Okay. People in high risk occupations tend to also engage in high risk leisure activities, such as hang gliding and rock climbing. So the reason I said this is different, we don't have like a identified person speaking. It's not more than one sentence. And after I read it too, it's like we're not really making an argument. We're just drawing an observation about a correlation that exists. So this is interesting because usually my whole approach is like read the argument and see if there's a gap between the evidence and the conclusion. So it's really helpful in logical reasoning to be able to identify the conclusion. And then everything else will be support for that conclusion and say, does everything else actually support the conclusion? That's like the majority of the questions here. Um, but that's not, you can't do that with this. All we have is high risk occupations tend to have high risk leisure. All right, let's keep going then. Each of the following, if true, helps to explain the phenomenon as described above, except, oh, you know what's interesting here? I'm starting to notice this more and more. When you have statements that are pretty simple like this, or they don't really make an argument, but they make an observation about something that maybe seems a little strange or maybe even just intriguing, those do tend to be explain the phenomena, resolve the I'm blanking on words. Paradox. It's a paradox question usually. This really isn't a paradox situation. I don't think it's all that confusing. But phenomenon and paradox kind of go hand in hand. So, what would help explain the situation? Why would people in high risk occupations also engage in high risk leisure? You might think that's paradoxical, actually, because it's like if your risk is already a life from work, why would you want to keep risking your life? Okay, cool. So the question is asking me to find which one doesn't help resolve the situation, which one doesn't help explain this relationship. So anything that does make this make sense is not the answer I'm looking for. I want to find the answer that either does nothing for this or it makes it even more confusing. Anything that makes this make more sense, cut it out. You got to make sure that you're in a right headspace before you go into those options for that, because at the end of the day, it's so easy to lose your place and to get confused about what you're looking for as you read. So again, to cement that one more time, I'm looking for an answer that either doesn't help this at all or makes it more confusing. Okay. A, people who would be bored by low risk occupations would also be bored by low risk leisure activities. Okay. Bored by low risk. I got thrown off by this one because now you're talking about who's bored with low risk, and like we were talking about who has high risk. Here's how that might help. If you're bored by low risk occupation, that means you're more likely to have a high risk occupation. So those people who are more likely to have high risk occupations would also be bored by low risk leisure. So then they would probably also participate in high risk leisure. I'll allow it. I don't love it, but I'll allow it because I think that can work. Okay, B. A below average ability to calculate risk. Below average ability to calculate risk. So they're not good at calculating risk. Makes people more likely to seek out not only high risk leisure activities, but also high risk jobs. Okay, so the people who are in those jobs um, have a lower ability to calculate risk. So they're doing everything high risk. Cool, that makes sense. People who enjoy excitement are drawn both to high risk jobs and to high risk leisure. Yeah, okay, cool. They just enjoy excitement. People in certain low risk occupations tend to engage in high risk leisure activity. That's my answer. What? Low risk occupations have high risk leisure? What does that do for explaining this situation? Nothing. That's my answer. E, the process of acclimating to a high risk occupation encourages individuals to adopt positive attitudes. Acclimating to high risk occupation encourages, okay, positive attitudes towards risk taking in general. Okay, that would make sense because when you have to get used to the high risk occupation, you're like, okay, cool. I know how to adapt to risk in general. I like risk. That would make sense. This is our answer because it doesn't actually help clear this up at all. Now we're talking about low risk occupation people, period, and how they do high risk. Like this is giving me more complication. Yes. Okay. Cars with automatic transmissions are typically more expensive than cars with manual transmissions. Okay, automatic, more expensive than manual. Is that actually true? Yeah, whatever. I think that is true. And cars with air conditioning tend to be more expensive than cars without air conditioning. Okay, so the automatic and the air conditioning are more expensive than the manual and the without. Thus, since Sasha's car has an automatic transmission, mhm, it probably has air conditioning. It must have been expensive. Ah, why'd you do that? You could have just said that her car had an automatic, it has an automatic transmission, so it's probably more expensive. You didn't do anything to connect the automatic transmission with the air conditioning other than say that they were both expensive. You didn't say the automatic transmission cars are the ones with the air conditioning. You did too much. You did too much. And therefore, this is going to fall apart. Um, And also, let's talk about that conclusion and evidence piece I was just talking about earlier. This is one of those typical examples. So we have our conclusion, which is here at this thus. Yes, this is one of those flag words that people like to identify to say, hey, here's how you find a conclusion. In conclusion, thus, therefore, so you can see, right? Those are the types of catchphrases. They're not always that easy to find. Most often I find that they're not. But this is a really easy one to identify. Let me get my annotate ready here. Yeah, when they say thus, since, blah, 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 all that is the conclusion. So this is our conclusion. And then everything that's not the sentence, because this whole sentence is the conclusionary statement. Everything that's not this last sentence is support. And so to break that down, what I talked about earlier, the question is, does the support actually do a good job of proving this conclusion? What I was saying earlier is that no, it does not, because this conclusion has to deal with saying that the car has an automatic transmission, therefore, um, it probably has air conditioning and must have been expensive. But the evidence up here about automatic transmissions only talked about it being more expensive. The cars with air conditioning, all we said about that was they tend to be more expensive. Not that they tend to be more expensive and they usually come with automatic transmissions. So hopefully that breaks that down for anybody who was a little lost there. Let's keep going. Question number 4. The argument above is most similar in its flawed reasoning to which one of the following arguments? Okay, interesting. So they don't want you to do anything about strengthening, weakening the argument. They don't want to do anything about what is it? Strengthen, weaken. Mm, ooh, blanking again. Strengthen, weaken. Oh, necessary assumption. Like they're not doing any of those three core things that you usually do with the gaps of the arguments that have gaps in them. They want you to just find an argument that's similar in the pattern. So find an argument basically that does this trick here. It'll say one fact about um this object with this characteristic tends to be more of something than this other thing. And the same object with this other characteristic tends to be more expensive or more something than this other thing. Therefore, since this example of this object has one of those more expensive things, it probably has the other expensive, well, it has one of those specified things we talked about earlier. It probably has the other specified thing we talked about that's more of, and is also more of. I'm keeping it general and vague like that because they can flip this and make it sound like a bunch of other stuff. They might not deal with being more expensive. It might be more aggressive or whatever. So you have to keep it in general terms like that, but you just got to kind of keep those relationships in your head. Sometimes when you're early on this journey, or if you just struggle with these in general, it can help to kind of draw a schematic, like a picture, to kind of help keep those relationships in order for you. Um, I don't like pictures on these because they tend to confuse me. But I have seen people work through these very successfully with pictures. Anybody in my room right now, if you want me to draw a picture, I will do it for you because I love y'all. But if nobody's asking me, I'm not doing it because literally I think pictures confuse me and I'd rather just keep it in my head. So, let's go look for it. But basically, I'm looking for an argument that's going to sound a lot like this one in its frame, in the structure. Okay. Inorganic chemicals, see, they're already flipping it on me. And then I'm gonna go ahead and like, look, hamsters, savings accounts. So they're gonna talk about a bunch of different stuff in each of these. And my job is find the one that's most similar to this. Okay. Inorganic chemicals are usually less complex than organic chemicals. Okay. I would love it more if we said that something was more than something. But just because they're identifying something as less than something else doesn't mean it's not our answer. They just have to be consistent with the relationship of what's less and what's more. So here's what I mean. Since they said inorganic chemicals are the less thing than organic chemicals, at the end of this argument, what I know is that for it to actually parallel the argument we had over here, we're going to have to end with talking about organic chemicals. We're going to have to end with saying, well, since this thing is more complex, um, it's likely an organic chemical and whatever else they're going to talk about here. But I don't like it because we're talking about less complex. And if it follows every other pattern of this argument, but it just flips it from more to less, I'll keep it open in the case that I don't find anything else. Because if they flip this and everything else is exactly the same, they just flipped the relationship between more to less, then it could still work because then you're still dealing with like this thing is more than this thing, and if we keep the roles in the right order, it could work. But again, I don't love it because ideally, something that would be the most similar to this would follow that more of pattern. But okay, let's see. Inorganic, usually less complex than organic, and chemicals with low molecular weights. Okay. Um, are generally less complex than chemicals with high molecular weights. Okay, now they're doing too much. Because we start off with inorganic chemicals less than organic. Cool. Then they say low molecular weights, less complex than high molecular weights. What am I wrong with this? Okay, wait. Oh, I think I read this funky. I was thinking that they switched in the organic and organic stuff in there and I was doing too much. Okay, we're okay so far. Inorganic, less than organic. Low molecular weight, less than high molecular weight. Okay. Thus, since the chemical being analyzed has a low molecular weight. Okay, here's the thing we're going to be looking for. The answer has to say, since it has low molecular weight, if it's parallel in this one, and not since we're focusing on less, it's gonna have to say that it is also likely inorganic and less complex. Let's see. It's probably inorganic and must not be complex. Okay. So this one is actually the same as this argument, but it flips us from talking about something being more than something else to something being less. And then we stick with staying in that less relationship the whole time. So this is what I was talking about, where if they do that, I'll keep it open. But if I find anything that talks about more than something and really hammers on the relationship of the more side instead of the less side, that's gonna be my answer. So I don't like the fact that, yes, we're doing the same thing in a sense, but we're focused on what's less of. So we'll keep it open. Okay. As a rule, hamsters are larger than gerbils. Okay. And have larger litters than gerbils. Here's why I don't like this one. In this case, we talked about automatic transitions more than cars with manual. I guess, okay, we do have hamsters in both of these cases. So you can think of this hamster larger than gerbils. Okay, no, I don't like it because here we had an object with this characteristic um is usually more than the same object with a different characteristic. And we start off with the object and the character hamsters with larger size. Okay, fine. Hamsters larger size. No, because what's okay, yeah, I was right the first time. In order for us to be right, we would need something that makes the hamsters different from the gerbils, and then saying that they're bigger, better, some other kind of thing. And we don't have a characteristic to go with it. If we said like hamsters with spots, for instance, are larger than gerbils. Um, and hamsters with some other characteristic has a larger litter than a gerbil. Yeah, they're throwing too many things in here that just it's just not aligning. Um, yeah, that's just it's getting too complicated. On average, savings accounts offer higher interest rates than checking accounts. Okay. So savings accounts are higher than checking accounts. I don't like this for the same reason I didn't like B, which is I don't have a thing with a characteristic that's more of something than another object with the characteristic, right? We don't have people with saving accounts are more blah, blah, blah than people with checking accounts. It's just saving accounts have higher interest rates than checking accounts. I don't like it. I'm gonna cut that out. Let's see what I end up with. Bowlers typically have greater arm strength than golfers. Okay, the object with the characteristic, arm strength. Yeah, okay. Bowlers have greater arm strength typically than golfers. Okay. People who lift weights, it's people, so I'll allow it for now, usually have greater arm strength than marathon runners. The comparison thing is the same. Okay, like it. Thus, since Deborah's a bowler, yes, the right answer would be then she's likely lifts weights and has greater arm strength. She probably also lifts weights and has greater arms. Yes, that's it. That's it. That's it. It follows the pattern, bar for bar. Okay, I was getting scared. I was like, oh no, don't leave me with this. This I didn't like because again, we're focusing on the wrong part of the relationship. So This is exactly what I needed to do. We have our group, we have the characteristic, which is arm strength. Arm strength is greater in bowlers than it is in golfers typically. Arm strength is also greater in people who lift weights than marathon. So we got a bowler, we have automatic transmission, okay? It's probably also going to lift weights and have the greater arm strength. And the problem was you can't do that. We needed to just say, um, probably has greater arm strength, and you jumped into the weights thing. Okay, let's just run through this one. Movies with well-known actors are usually more popular than movies without them. Oh, also, since I'm going through E, the part of the reason that I go through all of these thoroughly as I'm going through these videos instead of just skipping through and running, is because I also want you all to take note of what your review should look like. So when you answer stuff in logical reasoning, and you go through your time conditions, you're trying to get through that efficiently and quickly as possible by recognizing the patterns you've been training on. But where most of your growth comes from is in your review space. And so something I work with people on one-on-one, is fine-tuning that review, meaning after you complete your section and you're going back over and you're looking at questions that you struggle with, which I usually tell people to flag, um, whether you got them wrong or right, and you go over the ones that you got wrong, you're gonna run through this question like I do here, but you're also gonna very slowly and carefully take your time to explain why each of these ones is wrong and why the right answer is right. So that you can exactly understand how the right answers line up with the question. And you can exactly understand what these wrong answers do, what moves they make, what they look like, what they sound like, what they feel like. And you can start catching that and you'll get better at catching the patterns of wrong to right answers. So that was me dropping major T there. Hope you caught it. And we're gonna move along. E. Movies with well-known actors are usually more popular than movies without them. We have the object, we have the characteristic. Okay, well-known actors more popular than movies without them. And movies with happy endings, okay, tend to be more popular, yes, than movies with unhappy endings. Okay, thus, since tonight's movie has well-known actors, uh-huh, the right answer would be it is probably gonna be more popular and it's gonna have a happy ending. Probably end happily and be more popular. Okay, here's the issue. I would have been really messed up if it didn't have this then a movie that ends unhappily. But because it has this then a movie that ends unhappily, um, that's the part that throws it off. Because here, we didn't do that, whereas, oh, it must have been more expensive than this other thing. No, we just said it must have been expensive, period. And this is making another comparison about a specific way in which it's more popular. Mm-mm. Nope. It should have just been probably end happily and be more popular. That's it in general. Okay, let's see. Not the not the A. Oh, we're having a rough night, y'all. I've been having a rough week, I'm telling you. Okay, so we know, I'm gonna already tell you, we know why this one works. Because again, it did parallel this in all those pieces we talked about. It just focused on the less complex side and relationship than the more. Now, what I have to catch is what did I miss in D? What made D wrong? What did I do? Um, and I also need to catch what happened with me. Did I choose D because I was so excited to find something that just didn't do this thing I was uncomfortable with, even though it worked? Or did I choose D really because like I fundamentally misunderstood something? So let's go back and check. Okay. So again, let's review what this was. And let me annotate a little bit. Okay. So we have cars. Okay. And then we're going to say automatic transitions. And then we got manual transmissions. And we got, I'm going to make this red too, more expensive. Okay. So cars with this thing are typically more expensive than this other thing. This object with this thing, it tends to be more of something than this thing. Okay, got it. And we got another. Cars, again, with air conditioning. Let me just go ahead and highlight the more expensive again because I'm already in red. Let me see what my chat just said. That's the part I struggle with, is going back to breaking down the right and wrong answers, sitting with the review part more. Yes, you definitely, even when it's like super uncomfortable, hold up, let me take my annotate off because now it's acting up. Even when it's super uncomfortable, I get it. But sitting in that review is really just going to help you catch your mistakes a lot better. Um, I am sitting here and I'm like, what did I do that for? I took all this time to be careful and I still got it wrong. And that should frustrate you. It should not frustrate you in the sense of telling you you can't do it, but it should frustrate you in the sense of you knew better. Somewhere you knew better and you chose wrong. So let's figure out how to not do that again. But you only figure that stuff out in your review. But it's all right. You recognizing that it's a struggle for you is like the first piece to like fixing it and getting away from doing that. Um, Sometimes review can take people days. And I expect that, especially early on in your journey. The more answers you start to get right, the less time I expect you to take on looking over stuff. Yep. We got an agreement here in our group here. So yeah, y'all, that's why we're working together because we can talk about how to do better in our review, how to have more patience in our review. And I'm glad y'all told me because next time we meet one-on-one, we'll be talking about that. Okay, so what can we do to make review feel better? How can we make it work for you better? Because I promise you, that's where you'll start seeing that significant growth. Okay, let me get back to my little colors. Okay, so we got the cars and the more expensive. And the first situation, we had automatic transmissions versus manual transmissions. I'm gonna do a different color for the second relationship. I'll do green. The second relationship, we're doing air conditioning, more expensive than without air conditioning. Cool. So then at the end, we said Sasha's car, okay, has the, let me see, automatic transmission. It probably has air conditioning and must have been expensive. So we're also going to do green, probably has air conditioning and must have been expensive. We're going to put in back in red again. Cool. Is this actually going to help me? I don't know. Um, but this might help y'all. So let me stick with what I got there. So this is what we had, right? They follow this pattern. We have the thing that's introduced with this thing more than this other thing. We knew that this followed it exactly. It just was on the other side. So now we're looking at D. What happened? All right. You know what? I will highlight again with my little colors and all that. So let's start off with bowlers. Okay, cool. Typically have greater arm strength. I'm gonna like keep that open for now. Nope, nope, nope. I'm gonna just switch my colors back and forth. It ain't that deep. Okay. Bowlers with arm strength. This might be my issue because they like combine the greater than and the arm strength thing. But let's just see. Here we're gonna say, yeah, I think that's the issue. I don't even have to do that much. And I had a thought about this earlier, but I was like, no, it's fine. It's not fine. Let me clear up what I'm talking about. So you see here how we have the object with this characteristic, typically more of something else. Like the characteristic is separate from the more comparison. Here, the characteristic is not separate from the more comparison. They're together. So whereas here I have separation between the blue and the red, here the blue would be arm strength. Yeah. And then the red would be um greater. Like you might put it that way, or you might just say like maybe that was wrong, and maybe what should have been the case was the blue would be the bowlers, and we're missing that first red object. Because then you would have this thing, these people who are bowlers typically have greater arm strength. And that would actually, whoop, sorry about that. That would actually sound better in comparison to what we had over here. People who are bowlers typically have greater arm strength. And then that's would mean that um, greater arm strength will all be in red. That would be more parallel to what we had over here. Or if again, if I take this to be the object, bowlers, then I'm gonna need to have bowlers in my second piece too, and we lost bowlers here. What do I mean? Okay, look. Um, over here, let me just follow the picture schematic 100% here. So cars with automatic transmissions are typically more expensive. I'm gonna keep with this for a second. We'll roll with this one. So here we're saying bowlers is equivalent to cars, um, who typically have arm strength that's greater. Okay. Then what's gonna be my other blue? Golfers? And see, that's where I should have an issue too, because that doesn't work. Because my blue is supposed to be related to the other thing that's related to the blue. This is manual transmissions versus automatic transmissions. If this is my blue on this side, then it needs to be bowlers for blue. So I'm already messing up there. So yeah, it would have to be the case to be even close to parallel with this one, that I have golfers versus bowlers. And then I have air conditioning, non-air conditioning. I'm gonna have weightlifters versus marathon runners. And the question then is going to be, what's the object with this thing? It would have to be like this unidentified people, and no people is there. And then you might be like, well, maybe it could still work. Maybe, but why would that work versus, oh no, that's fine. Why would that work versus A? A didn't do any of that stuff. A directly told me, all right, let me get back to my colors again. Oh man, can I like undo what yes, I can. And then I can also undo those. Okay. So here's why A is just better. I'm gonna just flip the relationship. Here we go. Inorganic chemicals. So we're gonna say, yeah, this is our thing. And am I gonna say chemicals or just inorganic? What does the next thing do? Chemicals. Okay, hold on, let me go back. Okay. Chemicals. Okay. Um, that are inorganic are usually less complex. That's what we're hanging on right now. Okay. And then my blue here, in comparison to what we had in the stimulus, this little passage over here, we have chemicals that are inorganic are usually less complex than organic chemicals. Cool. We got it. We're following so far. Now the next side. We got chemicals with low molecular weights are generally less complex again. Okay, let me go back to my blue. This one. Okay, chemicals with low molecular weights. Oh wait, it's not supposed to be blue. Sorry, I chose the wrong color, y'all. Low molecular weights are generally less complex than chemicals with high molecular weights. Okay, thus, since, let me go back here, this chemical, boom, being analyzed, has a low molecular weight, which was the blue thing, or is the green thing? Okay. Go ahead, Balumi, and I'm gonna look at the chat after that. Go ahead, Balumi.
Okay, I was gonna say, I don't know if it's because it's late, but I'm having a really difficult time understanding how A is the right answer, or even like the whole color coding. It
Mm-hmm.
makes sense for the stimulus that you like the initial question,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't understand how A is following the same pattern.
Okay. Okay. I got some follow-up questions for you. Let me look at my chat and just make sure that there's nothing that's too similar. So if there is, I can just capture y'all in one. But I'm gonna follow up with you. Let me look at the chat real quick.
I can say the same too because it
Okay.
seems like the other answer was so much more simpler than A is. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like A is just confusing me even more from when I thought I was confused. So I'm just like, my brain is hurting because I'm just like, this doesn't make any sense.
No, like seriously, I was just staring. I was like, yeah, no.
And it's hard to like follow along because it's like, what? Like,
Okay. Thank y'all for telling me. So tell me something. Tell me what you kind of do understand about the what we're looking for. Let's start over here on the left. What is it like we're supposed to be looking for? And then kind of tell me if you do see A kind of connected in any way. Tell me what you do see. And then I can try and understand where the gap is. And that's for either one of y'all.
Okay, so I think to my understanding, we're supposed to be looking for something that follows like, or at least similar to the pattern of the question.
Yes. Yes. Okay. And tell me something else. If it wasn't A for y'all, I'll get rid of these lines later. Which one did you think it might have been?
D, like you put, because it
Mm,
follows the same structure. I feel like A kind of has other like extra details.
okay.
And I think the extra details that the stimulus doesn't give is throwing me off, like because you have more highlighted and underlined for A, and it's just like, yeah, that's where I'm getting it.
Okay. Palumi, is that the same for you?
Yes, the same. And also, how is like inorganic chemical not the same color coded?
Oh, like it's not one color?
Yes.
Here's how I caught it. Let me do a few things here. Let me just back up all these lines on A. Okay. So, the first thing, let's start off with D and why I was wrong one more time. And then I'm gonna come back and compare that to A.
Can
So,
you not do the color coding? Because I think that's probably adding on the extra confusion
okay.
when you
Thank you.
explain.
Yep. I'll explain it with no colors. So, D, the problem was that in the stimulus, we had an object and there were these certain like things about it. So in this case, we had cars with automatic are more expensive than manual. Okay. So we had this thing, this category. And out of this category, you got manual and you got automatic. The automatic tends to be more expensive. Here's the problem where D already starts to mess up. We have a thing, bowlers, but if D followed the stimulus's pattern, we would have to have bowlers with something tend to be more something than another
Oh,
group.
well, I get it. Yeah.
Yep. So that's where we messed up, and I was just too more than happy to like choose that when it wasn't following that pattern. It missed that completely. But here's where A does better. A says inorganic chemicals. So we have our something. And Palumi, you're like, wait a minute. Shouldn't it just be inorganic chemicals the whole way through then? You think so until you keep reading. So let's just keep reading, then I'll tell you where I caught it. So inorganic chemicals are usually less complex than organic chemicals. So here we had our thing that's more than something else, but it's like, where's the width? right? We have the thing with this thing. Thing with this characteristic is usually more of something without that characteristic. Here, they just say a thing is usually more or less than another thing. And here's the deal. When I first read this, I knew that these started to come apart because what you had was chemicals followed on both of these sides. You start off with inorganic chemicals, and then they say less complex than organic chemicals. So here's where I'm like, okay, well, the real comparison here is in chemicals. So we started off with saying then you could rephrase this so that it's more comparable to the stimulus, and you could say chemicals that are organic. So chemicals with this certain trait. And that's why I said like cars with this characteristic, because that also helps you to point out when you have this object with this characteristic. Is that following, pulling me?
I think so, yes.
Okay. I'm gonna keep going, and then if I need to back it up again, I can. But here's this object with this characteristic, and it's typically less complex than this other object where no. The same object with this other characteristic. That's exactly what happens over here on the left. The difference is they said less instead of more. But less and more are like two sides of the same coin. Now, the reason that this ultimately ends up being the answer is because where they easily could have messed this up is they could have took us from talking about the less complex thing and then all of a sudden flipped it to talking about what's more. But they didn't do that. They stuck with the other side of the coin the whole time. So anytime there's a more, there's always a less. And they chose to stick with the less side. Remember, that's why I did not like this one. Because I was like, we're talking about what's more. But I also understand, having done a bunch of these questions, that just because the stimulus says more, that doesn't mean that the answer has to have more too. If it has less and it follows everything else in terms of the pattern, it's right. Especially if there's not another answer that talks about more and follows the pattern. If you had A and you had like another answer that exactly followed this pattern and talked about more the whole way through, that would be the right answer. Because we're asking what's most similar. And what will be most similar between two options that talk about more or less, the one that talks about more is going to be the right answer. But we didn't have that. We had one that talked about less and mimicked everything, and then the rest of them failed somewhere. So that if you were following by rules of elimination, you would cross these out if you caught the things you're supposed to catch, and you'd be back here. And then you would have to accept, okay, it talked about less. What am I going to do with that? Does everything else follow from less? I'm going to let go of the fact that it doesn't do more. It does less. Okay, great. Does everything else follow the pattern of what I saw? So chemicals with this characteristic are usually less than chemicals with this other characteristic. That's following. Cars with this characteristic are typically, you could literally flip this and say less than same object with this other characteristic.
Mm.
So we're good there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that object again. And here's the thing. If you didn't catch it, that it was chemicals was your root object before, you definitely catch it here. Because the same thing we had, I'm not doing more colors, Deanna, I promise. Oh no, hold on. It was supposed to be red. Okay, so remember we had cars here and then we carried it through on the second half and cars. So what we did on the other side, I'm gonna get rid of my colors again. What we did over here though is we carried chemicals over to the other side. So we had chemicals with this characteristic, less than this other characteristic. Cool. Chemicals with low molecular weights. Okay, we got another characteristic on the table. Are generally less than the same object with a different version of that. Cars with air conditioning. We brought up a different characteristic. More than cars without. So we followed it again. Both of these hit the check mark of the object with the characteristic. In this case, we said less than this other side. And then we ended, and this is like where the key is. The conclusion, has to say, okay, this object in this case has one of the characteristics we talked about before. So that means that it's less, and that means that it has one of the other characteristics that's less. And when I found that, we said the chemical with low molecular weight. So we start off with the second half here. This chemical with this characteristic is probably inorganic. So we took one of those characteristics again, and must not be complex. Oh, you know what? That's another reason the D is wrong, but I'm gonna ignore that for now. Let me focus. Um, must not be complex instead of less complex. Here's why that follows the situation over here. Pay attention. What do we do here? We said that the car has an automatic transmission. We took one of the characteristics, and then we assumed that it must have that other characteristic, air conditioning, and that it must have been expensive. Not more expensive, just expensive, period. Because we talked about more expensive here, we talked about more expensive there, so they're just assuming it's expensive, period. And over here, we said it was less complex here, we said it was less complex here, so they're just gonna say it's not complex, period.
I see it now.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I will say that like these similar to the flawed reasoning questions, these are like the parallels. These parallel questions range. I think that in older versions of the LSAT, you would often get it where the parallel questions generally aren't that bad. Like it's pretty easy to follow. But I think this one had a lot of moving parts. They flipped you from more to less, and they also did this thing where when you get down to the conclusion, the characteristic they chose, let me see, low molecular weight, didn't exactly come in the right order from what we had over here. Um, in the example and the stimulus, the characteristic that they chose was from the first part of the observations they were making. So, right, they said the car has an automatic transmission, and that was from the first sentence. And then here they said the chemical being analyzed has a low molecular weight. That was from the second sentence or the second part that they were talking about. So they're flipping things around, shifting things, but they're not doing it in a way that changes the meaning. And that's the part you got to catch. So this would be like one of those more complex parallel questions. Those are starting to be more common on the newer tests because they're trying to make the test harder. So what I would say is the more of these parallel reasoning questions that you can practice to get comfortable, the better. But I also will say that even on the harder tests that I've been seeing, this isn't like a majority of your test. You might get like somewhere between 2 to 3 of these parallel questions, maybe 4 questions for parallel reasoning on a section. And out of those, like 1 to 2 of them might be difficult. So this is something to familiarize yourself with, get comfortable with, practice, but don't stress out over it. Because at the end of the day, if this is one of those things that you just get wrong on occasion, it's okay as long as the rest of your test is strong. But this one I shouldn't have missed because it did a lot of missteps in D. I just didn't want to choose it because they said less complex, and I was mad about that. But this made all kinds of mistakes. We didn't have the object comparison thing, and then also at the very end, um, look, greater arm strength than most marathon runners. What? It should just say great arm strength. And if I was gonna choose, if I was gonna cross out E because it says more popular than a movie that ends unhappily, why would I choose D? Because D did the same move at the end, greater than most marathon runners. I'm doing too much. So, Yeah, D was very wrong, and I'm mad that I chose it at all now, but it's okay. We live and we learn. Okay, so that's our session tonight. Um, Hopefully this was helpful and helping you think about how to approach your study and how to approach some of these different questions. Got more wrong than I'd like, but I love getting them wrong in front of y'all because you can see me literally have to work through and find my way back to the right answer. And like I said, the more important thing here is your review. So remember that. Okay, that's it. Y'all have a good night.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Have a good night. We can follow up in our one-on-ones. See, I got more specific questions. I'll see y'all later.
Thank you. See you later.